Alrighty, we will go. I'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Agent,
Here.
Clegg,
Here.
Halliburton,
Here.
Sanchez,
Here.
Willits, Woodings. Here. 5 present, 1 absent.
Thank you. So we've got for today's meeting, we've invited both the sheriff and the assessor to join us to share presentations with the council and the public, and then we'll move into the budget, which I'll introduce when it's Eric's turn to come on up. But I want to welcome you both. Thanks for being here. And first, we'll hear from Sheriff Matt Clifford.
Mayor and Council, thank you for having me. Sheriff Matt Clifford, Ada County Sheriff's Office. My purpose coming here today is to kind of introduce myself. I know some of you, but not all of you, and give you a little bit of an overview of what the Sheriff's Office does besides what you see out in front of you on the streets. And before I start, I should say, we work very closely in conjunction with Chief Lee and all the other chiefs here in Ada County. And I remember a few months ago, I met with the mayor, and Boise City officer was in the front lobby, and I said, "Oh, I was just saying hi to Rob." And she says, "Do you guys just know, all of you know each other?" And yeah, we kind of do. And that because we work very closely together as almost as one agency when times are tough, like with the mall shooting and incidents like that. So just wanted to throw that out there before I tell you how great my agency is. That the agencies in Ada County are really some really premier agencies. So the Ada County Sheriff's Office is the largest law enforcement agency in Idaho. We patrol about 1,060 square miles of land and 3,030 miles of roadway. We contract with the cities of Star, Eagle, and Kuna. And then, of course, we patrol the unincorporated areas of Ada County. So with those contracts, Kuna, Star, and Eagle have their own police departments, but they are all Ada County Sheriff's Office, and helps us kind of tailor law enforcement services to those specific communities. Because as you know, Kuna, Star, Eagle, all very different cities, and sometimes need different kinds of policing just based on what's in the community.
Madam Mayor, could we get this up on that screen so that we don't have to? Somebody knows, but I just wanted to, that way we can look at you,
yeah,
and what you're saying.
Probably a good idea. Sure.
My lap, how's that? So my question is, if as the biggest agency in the state, how many officers, sworn officers, do you have?
So we have a little over 400 sworn officers,
Okay.
and there are 800 employees, a little over 800 employees total.
And of those 400 that are non-sworn, how many work in records management? Because don't you also do records management for much of the county?
We do records management for, we don't do it for Boise City anymore. You have your own records management through Boise Police.
Right.
But we only do our own records management.
Oh, you only do your
but
own
we
now.
process, all the court paperwork comes into us for like protection order service and things like that. So what we'll do when they come in from the courts, so in a sense, yes, when those documents come in from the courts, then we contact whatever municipality needs to serve those orders, and then they'll come to Barrister and pick them up. So in a way, yes, but only for a small portion of that. Most of the records management is going to be dealing with the court paperwork and a lot of jail paperwork that come, we have inmates that come and go every day. And then, of course, anything that's coming out of patrol. Okay. So over 800 employees, like I said, of those 800, it looks like 299 live in the city of Boise. It's about 34%. Because the agency does so many things, and I'll go over them briefly, but because we do so, there are many different facets to what we do that other agencies in the state don't do. We've divided ourselves up into 5 different bureaus: Police Services Bureau, Jail Services, Court Services, Administrative, and Communications. And what I'll do is I'll just run through those bureaus really quickly and give you an overview of what they do. So this is your police services. This is what you see in front of you every day out on the streets. We're all familiar with patrol officers. We have one of the largest canine units in the state. We run a Metro SWAT team. So our SWAT team is comprised of the bulk is Ada County Sheriff deputies, and then we have Meridian police officers and Garden City police officers, and it helps us really coordinate our responses to those cities. Of course, we have narcotics unit. We have what we call an action team. That is basically a small street crimes team. They're kind of the jack of all trades. When we need maybe a dangerous felon apprehended, we'll put them on it as a project, or maybe we have a problem house in a neighborhood where we get repeated calls for service. We'll have them start focusing on how to solve that problem. Our action team is going to be very, very similar to what Boise Police has their NCOs, which are the neighborhood contact officers. And then our detectives for persons crimes, property crimes, juvenile crimes. And we run a crime lab that does a lot of different things. All agencies have to take and send their drug seizures to the state of Idaho for testing. We've gotten up to where we do all of our own in-house testing for that. We can do ballistics testing. We're working towards trying to do our own DNA testing. That's a very, very expensive venture, but we work with Idaho State Lab to allow us to use their equipment for our DNA purposes. And then, of course, we have a host of school resource officers in the CUNA School District and West Ada School District.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Sheriff Clifford, what would be the advantage of you doing your own testing, even though it's very expensive?
The biggest advantage is time. The state lab does testing for everyone all around the state. So I don't know the exact time, but I'll just give you an example. Let's say you have some meth that was taken off the street and you need to test it, have it tested in a lab to make sure it is actually meth. Any agency would send it to the Idaho State Lab, and it gets put in line with all of those other samples from around the state, where we can take it and our turnaround can be a few days. It could be months or longer with the state lab.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Good morning, Sheriff.
Morning.
Lisa Sanchez, we haven't met.
We haven't. No.
Good to meet you. I have a question about school resource officers. Can you tell me a little bit more about your program?
So the school resource officers are funded through the school districts. We fund part of them because they're off during the summer. So the school districts pay for about 9 months of those deputies. They are responsible for a lot of things, not just problems inside the school, but they also help monitor health and welfare referrals that are given that are submitted from health and welfare to the sheriff's office. If that child lives in if that child is enrolled in that school, then the school resource officer will often take that on as a case. And then, of course, they investigate crimes within the school. Some of them teach classes in the schools on safety and things like that. We've even had some of them coach sports within the schools. Every one of these schools is a little bit different. So we do allow the school to have a lot of leeway with how do you want your school resource officer to interact with the school? Do you want them as basically part of your administration, or do you want them to be much more responsive? And almost always they want them very much to integrate into the school employees. So they do a lot of different activities. Like I said, anywhere from investigating crimes to doing health and welfare referrals to teaching classes.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. Do you know if there's any such resource for private schools? Does this include private schools, or is it just public schools?
It is just public schools.
Mm-hmm.
So the funding, the sheriff's office is not funded to provide those deputies into schools. That's why the school district has to fund it. So a private school could fund a school resource officer, but it would be under a contractual basis, just like our city police, that we would have to have a contract that says, if you want a deputy, then you're going to have to pay for it because the commissioners didn't give me the money to fund one for the school.
And as far as you know, is there any situation like that?
Not in this county. I'm not aware of that in this county.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, so So we'll move on to the jail services. And this is going to be part of the sheriff's office that a lot of people don't see. I don't know how many of you have toured our jail. If you haven't, I would highly recommend it. The jail services is the largest part of my budget, and it is, quite frankly, has the largest liability in our agency, because what we're doing is now we're directly caring for individuals. We need to provide them with medical, housing. We need to make sure that their welfare is maintained, whether that's just safety in the form of clothing, food, and all of that. So currently, as of today, we have about 1,000 inmates in our jail. It is the largest jail in the state of Idaho. It is, I would go ahead and label it as overcrowded right now. Our community's been growing and our jail hasn't grown all that much, but I'll go through a little bit more of how we keep people outside of our jail. But we've done a really great job over the years of implementing programs with the courts where we can say, these people can be monitored outside of jail until we can get them to their court hearing or while they're serving time. And these people have to remain in jail just based on all kinds of criteria. Well, the issue today is because our population has grown so much, the number of inmates that we don't want outside of the jail until they go through court has grown. And what I always tell people is it's not that the crime rate has gone up. It's just that let's pretend 1% of the population commits all the crime. Well, it's still remaining at 1%, but that number that is 1% is getting bigger. So I started my career in the jail 22 years ago, and it was a much different place. Any deputy today will tell you that the jail population is basically hardened. We are finding a lot more inmates that it is not in the community's best interest to release out into the public. We do a thing called, we call it a jail sweep every week, and it basically identifies people that are maybe in on a charge that's a much lesser charge. There's a bond, they can't pay the bond. And you have to think, well, they're going to get stuck in this revolving door if we don't do something about that. So if somebody's in on a DUI that has a $300 bond and they can't afford it, and now they're stuck in jail and they're going to lose their job, well, that doesn't help anybody. We need them to get out of jail, go to work, go to court. If they're guilty, pay their fine. So we want to help them do that. So the jail sweep works with prosecutors and judges. That jail personnel say, hey, these people are eligible for this. Well, just talking to one of my managers on Saturday, and she said, I'm finding less and less of these people that are eligible for these programs. And we don't really want to drop the bar because now we're letting more and more people out in our community that really probably should be held in the Ada County Jail until they're done with their court hearing. Some of the people that are in there are also serving time. You only serve time on misdemeanors in the county jail. Typically, you serve felony time at the state prison. We do get some people that get sentenced on felonies to the Ada County Jail. It's not common, but we just had a manslaughter case where judge sentenced him to a year in the county jail. Very uncommon, but it happens. We also house U.S. Marshal holds, and then of course you've probably seen in the news over the years the IDOC inmates that are sentenced that are awaiting transport out to the prison. With COVID, that became a very difficult situation because they were trying to quarantine, we were trying to quarantine, and they didn't want to take people in. And of course, we wanted to get people out. We work pretty closely with them, and we've got some of that figured out. But with counties, we can share information as sheriffs to say, hey, can you take, hey, Adams County, do you want to take these state inmates? And they can take them and hold them, and then the state can come pick them up from there. So very recently, we started more heavily networking with other counties to say, do you have beds available so that you can take these people to help our overcrowding, because you might not have that many inmates in your jail. One of the things people don't think about too is, we have to provide a lot of medical needs for these folks, and a lot of them, I'm not going to say a lot of them, but a portion of them that come into the jail need medical care, and they either don't have it or they don't seek it out outside of the jail. And so when they land in the lap of the sheriff's office, we are obligated to provide them with the medical care that they actually need. So that's a big liability. And in today's world, with the shortage of nurses and how much nurses cost, that's a big issue for us. We employ 33 medical staff, and we're about at half of that. So they're working overtime to try and keep the medical unit running. I don't know if the statistic is correct, but a few years ago, it was said that we have the 7th largest hospital inside our jail. But we have our own pharmacy and nurses and PAs and doctors that come in and out and work to provide medical care for inmates. Just to give you an example of the overcrowding issue is, so that statistic there says that we can house up to 1,116 inmates. That is what's called that's going to be the operational capacity. So if we stacked them all in there like cordwood, we could do over 1,200, but that's not going to be safe for inmates or deputies. And quite frankly, we can't give them the resources they need if we did that. We could put 1,116 in there, but people need to understand that we have to separate people by gender and by gang affiliation or enemies and things like that. So you have to have room in there to move people around so that everybody's safe, both inmates and deputies. So the operational capacity is the number that we really look at. And as of today, I have 8 dormitories inside the jail, and every single one of them is over operational capacity from anywhere by 103% to 133%. So that means people are sleeping on what we call boats. They're big plastic cots that just lay on the ground. We really, really try to avoid that. So this year will probably be the year where we try and figure out how we can get funding to increase the size of the jail. And we're also still going to try and bolster those programs outside the jail as well. And another thing people don't think about the jail is it's a little town. I mean, that's bigger than a lot of little towns in Idaho. And so we have kitchen facilities, laundry facilities, warehouse, a little tiny hospital. It's a buzz of activity, and it takes a lot of money and a lot of people to run it.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Thank you for that information, Sheriff. I actually have spent some time in your facility as an inmate, briefly for about 6 hours.
Okay.
For the Add the Words
Okay.
a few years back, which I'm really grateful to have had that experience. I think everyone should spend some time in jail as an inmate to truly understand that it doesn't matter how nice the facility is when you have your freedom taken from you. It's a dehumanizing experience, and I understand there are reasons for it. But I think it's one of the experiences I'm so grateful that I've had. I now know what that feeling is like, to be behind bars, to have to use the bathroom in front of other people, to be less than human. And so I appreciate the difficult task it is to manage that type of population. But when you describe folks as being hardened, can you give that a little bit more detail?
Sure. And I apologize for the slang, but basically those are going to be people that are going to be the ones that have committed the types of crimes where we don't want to let them out into the community until they've gone through their court process. So there are enough factors there to say this person is dangerous to the community, or at least dangerous to a victim, which is usually much more of the criteria. So let's say somebody who's in on a felony domestic battery. Okay, well, this person's dangerous to this victim. They might not victimize their neighbors. They might not victimize someone in a grocery store, but that person needs to be protected. So we need to keep them in. We're just seeing more violent crimes is what I'm saying because of that population increase. The rate hasn't gone up, but the population's gone up. So that's what I mean by that. People that have maybe are on parole for a violent crime and they commit another violent crime. Well, we have to keep them in because they've already been convicted on a violent crime, given a chance to live in our community, and they committed another one. So those are the types of situations I'm talking about. It almost always revolves around violent crime or a large degree of recidivism, but the recidivism would probably be a lesser percentage of that.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up, Madam Mayor. Do you track racial and ethnic information on the folks who?
We do.
Is there a possibility that, I don't know if you have that later on in your presentation, but is there a possibility of having that information at some point?
Absolutely. I don't have it in the presentation, but it's easily obtained. We track all of that through our data analytics crew.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Madam Mayor, I'm kind of on the same topic of demographics. Do we know where a lot of the folks in the jail are from? Are they from Idaho? Are they from the Treasure Valley? Are they from outside the state?
So obviously we've seen an increase in people from outside the state where they're originally from. They mostly reside here, but we have had it a lot because of the influx of people from out of state that are coming to Idaho. I don't know the statistic, but we have seen a larger an increase in those folks that are coming here. You know, here's what I always say to people, that if you just boil it down, really great people move to Ada County. They do. There are great people. They move here for great reasons, but somebody's always got like a shady nephew or a brother-in-law that kind of follows, you know, that's statistics. You know, there's always going to be that one little percentage that are the people that we deal with, because the people that we commonly deal with over and over are really a small percentage of our population. But I mean, that's just statistics. That's what happens.
Yeah. And Madam Mayor, just to be clear, so most of the folks who are at the jail right now, they are residents in the Treasure Valley or in Idaho.
Correct.
Okay, great.
Most of them are, yes. So I'll move on to our Court Services Bureau. This is a strange bureau. I won't call it a mishmash, but they do a lot of things. So we see our alternative sentencing and pretrial departments here. So alternative sentencing, that's going to be the SILD crew, where you see people out picking up trash, people that do community service, people that maybe come in and serve time on weekends. Those are all an attempt to keep people working and in the community, but still serving their sentence time that's been imposed by a judge. Now, the judge has to agree to all of that. The sheriff's office doesn't decide, hey, you're going to go through this program. The judge says you're sentenced on the, you know, whatever crime this is, and you have the ability to do these alternative sentencing programs that the sheriff's office provides. So we do a really great job of that. Right now, we have about almost 1,000 people that participate in our alternative sentencing and our pretrial programs. So pretrial means a judge will say you have the availability to do some of these programs that the sheriff's office provides, whether it's a case manager will talk to you every week, you'll wear ankle monitoring, randomly you'll come in and blow in a breathalyzer, those types of things. So because of how that person is maybe quote unquote classified of, you know, whether they have a lot of recidivism or if they don't, they can be qualified for these pretrial programs. We also have what we call the Community Transition Center. It's a newer program. It has been open for a year, but COVID has kind of kept us from opening it fully. We have about 44 people in that program. It's kind of based on the old work release program, where people can come in, they have to stay at the CTC, the Community Transition Center, to stay there at night, go to their jobs, and then come back. We do job search for them. We provide them with programming in the form of, you know, decision-making classes, some substance abuse classes, and we can also help them get their GED there. So again, another alternative to sitting in jail and doing nothing and losing your job. We can at least help them grow in a way where maybe they don't ever come back. And that's kind of the goal of that program as well. Let's give you some skills so that you're not in the jail and we're not paying for you to be there and you're not losing your job all at the same time.
Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a quick question about that alternative program, which I think is wonderful. Do you know if there's an ability for folks who maybe don't speak English to partake in programs like that?
So we can work through different organizations to make that happen. If there is basically how it works is there are all kinds of different nonprofits or government entities that are on a list to say, hey, we'd like to participate in your community service program. So most of the time, if they're on that list and it's someone that's maybe English as a second language, or those places we can look at and say, okay, well, this is, this one meets the qualification for someone that doesn't speak English. I don't know what those would be. It's a big list. I don't know what that would be, but any nonprofit can come and say, we'd really like to be on your list, and we can start plugging in people that would work for them the best. So I couldn't tell you yes or no if that is the case, but it's a long list, and depending on what that person wants for community service, then we could provide them with someone like that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So we also have our misdemeanor probation in this bureau. And right now on misdemeanor probation, we have about 1,278 people. Again, that's an alternative sentencing. So instead of them serving their 6 months to a year in jail on misdemeanor probation, we can supervise them outside the jail and monitor, what's going on with them. And of course, those are classified in all different kinds of people that really don't need any supervision. As long as they don't commit a crime, they're okay. And people need a high degree of supervision. Maybe they have a domestic battery history and they've committed another domestic battery. So different levels of supervision for all types of those people. But all in total, you're looking at about 1,300 people, or more than that, 2,300 people that are being supervised outside the jail, which is a larger population than we have inside the jail.
Madam Mayor. So quick, forgive my ignorance. I just don't know. Is felony probation run out of the sheriff's department as well, or is that a state office?
It's a great question. So misdemeanor probation is run out of the sheriff's office. State statute says that the county commissioners are responsible for misdemeanor probation. And in the past, they used to contract that to a private entity. In my opinion, it went very badly because it's a for-profit company. And so years ago, the commissioners said, you know what, how about we contract with the sheriff's office, who has a better vested interest in for people being successful. And so they've done that with us. That's why we run misdemeanor probation in Ada County. That's typical in other counties, not all of them, but that's typical. The state runs felony probation and parole. So they take care of anybody that's been sentenced for a felony, whether they've gone to prison and are paroled out, or whether they're out on probation.
Do you feel that if the state felony probation or probation officers probation practice was more robust, that you'd see less recidivism and less people in the jail?
My professional opinion is yes. I have a very, very close relationship with felony probation and a lot of friends that work there. And I know that probation officers have especially felony probation, they have a pretty difficult job. You have one side that's kind of enforcement, and then you have another side that's very much social work, and you really need a meet in the middle type of person to make it successful. And they typically make less money than a typical law enforcement officer, though they wear a uniform and carry a gun and build bulletproof vests and deal with felons in their homes all day long. So they don't have the type of hiring standards that, well, not hiring, they aren't able to keep people as long as other law enforcement agencies. Plus their caseloads are big. So the more people you have on your caseload, the harder it is to supervise them. And if you had a lot smaller caseloads, you can give people individual supervision a lot better. And they provide a lot of resources to people and really try and get people on the right track. A really good probation officer will tell you, I'm not out looking for something wrong with this person. I am looking for the violations, but I'm looking to see how we can change their behavior to keep them out of prison. But they also have the realistic of, oh, this person just can't be out here anymore. So really good probation officer, like I said, meets in the middle there with that enforcement and that social work, but it's not always easy to find that perfect person.
Thank you. Oh, I guess one more question is what I just heard was we've got great people doing great work. They're a little overloaded. Their caseloads are huge. If there were more great people to hire, and if there were more ability to hire them, we'd be more effective at, helping the public, citizens who committed crimes kind of get on the right track. And I guess my last question is, did you notice any trends in this regard during COVID? In other words, especially on the felony probation side, did you perceive, I guess bluntly, that it became less effective at deterring recidivism and getting people on the right track during that COVID time?
My observation is yes, it became less effective because, again, they weren't visiting people in their homes. There was a lot more work, probation officers that were having to work from home instead of being in the office where they can meet with probationers and again, not going to their homes. So by no fault of their own, it's less supervision for people that it's not necessarily they need somebody to have their thumb on them, but sometimes they need that supervision as part of a guiding hand to say, this program will help you with that. Hey, remember these behaviors cause this. And my opinion, they just didn't get that during COVID. So after things started to let up, we see a lot of probation violations, parole violations, because they're unsupervised and on their own. And some of these folks just need help. And when they're on their own, it's an issue for them. And, they make mistakes more often.
Thank you.
So inside this Court Services Bureau, we also have our civil division. State statute says that the sheriff's office is responsible for serving civil paperwork, doing evictions, all things civil. So none of the police departments have to do any of the civil processes that we do, garnishments and things like that. So we have a whole crew of deputies and employees that just do civil processes. We also do court security for the courthouse. A lot of people don't realize in years past, the sheriff's office didn't do security in the courthouse. So we had what's called a court marshal, which were a security that is run by the trial court administrator. A few years ago, they decided, let's switch that. Let's do the sheriff's office doing the security. And we're still working on keep getting that program where it needs to be, because it's a big lift. In here, we also have our transport team. A lot of people don't realize that Monday through Friday from 8 to 5, anywhere in this county, there's probably an inmate that is being supervised by a deputy, like an inmate, not someone that just needs a hand. These inmates, they have some needs that we can't meet inside the jail. So we need to make sure they get to specific doctor visits, eye appointments, all kinds of things that are all over the county, where we can't just let them out of the jail to go. So it's kind of comical sometimes. We always had a lot of pictures of deputies dressed up in gowns and booties and the little thing on their head. They're all in this gear, but they have to go into surgery with specific inmates. So if you have an inmate that is a flight risk or has a high propensity for violence, then they have to go into surgery with those inmates. So we have to be very careful with that type of thing. And HIPAA is always an issue when with law enforcement. So it's kind of a specialized area. It's about 27 deputies on that transport team. They take people to and from court. They go all over the nation to pick up people with warrants and bring them back to Ada County so that they can start going through their court process. We also have our training division in this area. We run our own academy, just like Boise City does, but we run a detention academy, a patrol academy, and a dispatch academy. So we have a pretty good training division that we're trying to make even more robust. So our administrative services, I'll go through this one really quickly. We have our property and evidence. We contract with Boise City Police to maintain their property and evidence. So they do Ada County Sheriff and Boise City. The sheriffs in Idaho are required to run the driver's license bureau. So we work with the state to issue driver's licenses to cities, to people all over the state. We also have our victim services in this bureau. So much like Boise City, we have our own victim witness unit where we give resources to victims, help them through the court process, and answer all their questions, whatever they need. Of course, we have a fleet services. We have, with all those transports and court security and misdemeanor probation and patrol, we have a lot of vehicles we have to maintain. And then, of course, finance. I was talking earlier about how this is finance is a little near and dear to me, because a lot of people also don't know by state statute, the sheriff is responsible for personally responsible for budget shortfalls. So I had to sign a piece of paper that said, you understand this, right? So if I overspend by $200,000, then Matt Clifford owes the county of Ada $200,000. So I have a really great finance team, and I love that they're excited about budget, much like your folks are today. And I tell them that. They're really good to me.
We'll stay on their good side.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, it keeps you in line for sure. I would still not overspend, but you always have that little thing in the back of your mind. So our communications bureau, we run the dispatch center for all of Ada County. So we dispatch every police agency, fire, and EMS. This is a big coordinated effort on our part. So when you call 911, you talk to an Ada County Sheriff's dispatcher. The computer then says, this is a Boise City call, and they send it to a Boise police officer. Really great setup. They're all in the same room, and it really helps us coordinate resources when there's a mass emergency, because you don't have people that are in different buildings trying to talk to each other. You don't have people that are on different phone lines trying to talk to each other. They're all right there and can turn around from their desk and help that dispatcher with the call. So, like when we had the mall shooting, that's pretty evident. When that happens, everybody's on high alert in the room and they have resources immediately available to them and can coordinate every single agency right from that room. Dispatchers took about 390,000 calls last year, 154,406 911 calls, and 235,000 non-emergencies. The text to 911 is still something I think people are getting used to. I foresee this year that those numbers should go up once we advertise that a little bit better and figure out how the public can use that a little bit easier. It's just one of those new programs that people aren't aware of.
Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a question about language capabilities for that is, do you have it set up so that, again, folks who don't speak English could make use of that service?
Yes. So we have, Boise City uses the same program. In fact, I believe we piggyback off the language learning program with Boise City. So we have a robust, I'm not sure if you know how that works, but a robust amount of unit of people that are citizens, but they're qualified to translate with law enforcement. They can come out to the scenes very often, or we can get on like a three-way call with them from dispatch and go ahead and take care of the call right then. And then once the dispatchers get the call, they have a file that says which deputies or officers can speak different languages. So they can pull up and say, okay, I need someone that speaks Russian. So they can look at the file and say, that gentleman's on duty and he speaks Russian. So we're going to get a hold of him and see if he can come to Meridian and help us, even though it's a Boise police officer.
And that text service is capable of?
I'm not sure if that text service is capable of that or not.
I think that would be great. And especially if you've got folks who are in a situation where they can't talk, and that might be the safest. I like that that's an option for folks. Thank you, Sheriff.
Mm-hmm. Yep, almost done. Yeah, yeah. I wasn't anticipating so many questions. I apologize. So here it is. This is the end. So very quickly. Just a little thing on our mission statement. We make safer places for you to live, work, and play. Police agencies are getting better at this, as are other government agencies, but mission statements over the years have evolved to become a little bit simpler. Many years ago, and a few sheriffs ago, this mission statement was put into place. And if you look at police agencies around the nation at that time, especially, their mission statements are many sentences long and they have all kinds of cool buzzwords in them. And the meaning of that mission statement really gets lost because officers are just trying to memorize it and regurgitate it. I went to an advanced training officer course a long time ago, and I was there with all police agencies from all over the valley. And the instructor said, "Who can say your mission statement out loud right now?" And I raised my hand, and no one else raised their hand. And he said, "Well, what is it?" And I said, "We make safer places for you to live, work, and play." And everybody looked at me and said, that can't be your mission statement." I said, "Yeah, that's our mission statement." And the instructor was ecstatic. He said, "That's perfect. It's to the point. It's short. You can put it in a lot of places. And more importantly, it really tells you exactly what your agency is about, exactly what their mission is. Those words don't get lost in a bunch of fancy sentences that you make people memorize." And in closing, I really just want to say thank you for having me here. Again, I appreciate the relationship I have with Chief Lee. We've already, over the last 9 months, definitely worked together on a lot of things. I feel very comfortable. I can pick up the phone, call him. He can pick up the phone, call me. And we have done that to ask, "Hey, I need a resource that you have. Can I use it?" That's just how we work together here in this whole valley. And I think we're pretty blessed in that regard. We don't have agencies that are fighting amongst each other and have all this adversarial. That happens all over the nation, where you have sheriff's offices that aren't allowed inside a municipal boundary and vice versa. We don't have those types of relationships. We all work very closely together. And I think it has increased the public safety here tenfold.
Madam Mayor, I just have like a quick question that I was saving toward the end in case you answered it in your PowerPoint. And you just touched on a little bit the way that you work with Boise Police Department. Can you maybe give me like the top 5 ways that your agency interacts with the Boise Police Department to keep our shared citizens safer?
Yes. So our crime labs work together pretty closely. I think our crime lab is just a little bit more robust at this point. So we will help with some crime lab things. The property and evidence, obviously, because we contract with Boise Police, they work very closely. We hold a lot of evidence in our property room for them. When we have some kind of large community event, it's not uncommon for one of us to some type of agency head or captain, they'll talk together and say, hey, we're having this event. I just want you to be aware so that if we need resources under an emergency situation, that you're not caught off guard and say, okay, tell me about that. So we really coordinate any large event to say, this is happening. I don't need you to come here right now, but if I do, I want you to know about it. We'll share plans that are based around any kind of emergency plans based around those events. And then you really see it boots on the ground during emergency calls. It doesn't matter, especially during the nighttime when there are not a lot of resources available to every agency. You really triage calls and rely on other agencies to help you. I have been to domestic battery calls where I've called dispatch and said, there is no one to come help me. Can you please call Boise City, because they're not that far away from the city, and see if someone will come. I've been in physical altercations when we had the Boise State contract where I'm laying in the street fighting with somebody and I need help. Well, county deputy's not going to make it. And it's no big deal for another agency to just come to your aid. And we saw that with the Brandon Austin shooting at Eagle, where one of my deputies was shot there a couple of years ago. Every agency from, close to every agency in the Valley showed up for that. We had every agency here in Ada County, ISP, and Canyon County that showed up to that call to help look for the suspect and get aid to the deputy. So those are big things. The boots on the ground stuff is the biggest.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. If you ever have questions, just let me know.
All right, Mr. McQuaid, welcome.
Okay, sure. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Madam Mayor, members of the council, it's nice to be here, especially in person. We've been doing it virtually. I really prefer to be here for this. I'm going to make this really quick because I know you're constrained for time. I've got my timer on my watch set for 10 minutes. So I'm just going to go right through this and we'll get this wrapped up. That's what I'm going to talk about. First of all, I want to thank Eric for reaching out. We really appreciate that. And we've developed a great working relationship with the staff at Boise City over the last couple of years, and it's very much appreciated. I'm going to talk about the assessment process, values for 2022, and some legislative issues that we're facing, and I know that are impacting Boise City. The assessments. In the fall, what we do is we do the physical inspection. By statute, we have to look at 25% of all of the parcels. So it takes 5 years to, or 20%. So 5 years, we do 100%. We've done that in the fall. Because where we are right now, this spring, is we're analyzing all of the sales that we collected last year. We had almost 12,000 single-family residential sales. We're looking at those sales, time adjusting them to January 1st of this year. We'll then look at our January 1st, 2021 values and see what the percentage difference is. And that will give us direction of where we want to increase single family residential. I just want to make a point too, is people accuse me of raising values to get more money for the city or for the county. That's not what we do. We follow the market. Our assessments are based upon sales. So we have nothing to do with forecasting or setting values. We're analyzing them. So what did we see last year? Single family residential, 30 to 35% increase. And that's what our assessments are going to be this year. Somewhere between 30 and 35% on single family residential. Apartments, I've heard, are going up by the same amount. The median value of single family residence in Boise City is just at about $600,000, $599,000. And I can't believe that, but that's where we are. Commercial is going up 15%. Talking about assessments, the tax burden, that's who's paying the taxes, residential versus commercial. Here in Boise City, 68% of the residential parcels are 60% of the tax burden, or 68% of the property tax are paid by single family residential. The other 32% is by commercial. Other cities, more rural cities, it's almost 90 or 92% residential. So Boise City is in a much better position. We're going to be sending out 95,000. It would help if I do this. You can follow along. 95,000 assessment notices are going to be mailed out in May, and that's to residents of Boise City. It'll be about 210,000 countywide. And then in July, we'll have so we're going to be doing the assessment, sending out assessment notices, and then in July, we have the appeals. Last year, we had a 26% increase in values. We had the least number of appeals in 2 decades. We didn't have any idea how many appeals we would have with a large increase. We were just really bracing ourselves. But a very small number. I don't know if we'll get off that easy this year, but the people really have a feel of what's going on. So I want to get into numbers that would be useful for your budget. First of all, I need to just make it very clear, these are extremely preliminary numbers. Usually we don't give these out probably until mid-April. So we're way ahead, and there's going to be some adjustments. My guess would be that the new construction roll could possibly be a little bit higher than what we see here. But residential, that is, right now it's off 210 million. It's off a little bit. But again, I think that when we're finished with doing our analysis, that could be higher than that. I would just want to point out new subdivisions and change of use, that probably is going to be 0 this year. There's some legislation that was passed this year, it's sitting at the governor's desk, and that is that subdivision change of use. That's mainly change of use in land. So if you have a piece of residential property that became commercial, that difference in value would go to the new construction roll. This piece of legislation is before the governor right now. Change of use in land does not go towards the new construction roll. So that probably will come off, but it's 33 million out of 500 million. So it shouldn't be really that significant. The potential taxable value, that's the total market value. It's about 50 billion. Take out the homeowners exemption, 7 billion, other exemptions, just about almost $1 billion in exemptions are still out there. By statute, exemptions have to be submitted to the commissioners by April 15th and then given to the assessor by about May 15th. So there are a lot of exemptions that should be processed. And I'm going to show you where this really becomes important in just a moment here. Operating property, that's railroad tracks, power lines, whatever, gives you a potential taxable value of about $42 billion. And by way of comparison, last year you had about a $36 billion potential taxable value. So it's about a 17% increase. Again, these are very preliminary, and Eric can go with my staff at any time and get updates. Probably when we get into April, we'll be doing updates on a weekly basis.
Madam Mayor. Bob, quick question about the exemptions, other exemptions. I assume that does not include, or does it, the legislated exemption of personal property up to 100,000. Does this number represent that?
This number are, I don't know if this is going to answer it directly. These are exemptions that have been approved in the past, and we have not seen them yet this year.
Okay. So these aren't the legislated exemptions at the top. These are the ones that the county does.
The commissioners will approve, right? And the personal property exemption, that's reimbursed, that first $100,000. And I think there's a reimbursement. The personal property has been increased, and the legislature reimburses that. But this is strictly what the commissioners are going to approve.
And I ask that question because I think, there's an there seems to be a presumption that the homeowner's exemption is maybe big enough. Look how big it is compared to all the other exemptions. But we don't calculate the legislated exemptions of personal property tax and inventory tax over the years that have impacted commercial property so highly. So anyway, just.
Yeah, those are very, very good points. So 42 billion potential taxable value. Urban renewal, you take a look at the numbers there. I just want to direct your attention to the Myrtle River Warm Springs amended. That's 192% increase. That's where the exemptions are showing up, those outstanding exemptions. There's the St. Luke's exemptions we've not seen those yet. So when those are taken into consideration, that's going to go down and be looking more like the rest of them there. All right, let us, we'll go to legislation. We're just about finished here. In 2020, the legislature passed a bill that affected the application date of the Homestead Exemption. It was April 15th. In 2020, they passed it effective 2021. And it extended that from April 15th to the end of the year. And you can see here, there's a loss of taxable value to the districts, and for Boise City, because we now have to prorate the homestead exemption. So if somebody, actually it's, the big question is it prorated or not prorated? The tax commission directed us not to prorate it. If they apply for the exemption December 30th, they get it for the entire year. I've talked to legislators. One of the legislators who was involved in this bill, we thought was going to bring something forward that would say it's not for the whole year, it's to be prorated, and that didn't happen. So we might be looking at something similar to this, but I just want to point out here, this is the fact that there's a loss of value when they apply for this. Boise City lost $91 million in taxable value, about $420,000 in lost taxes because of this. If it becomes prorated, which is it's not going to this year, it'll probably be pretty close to that again. So that was pretty significant, I think. That's, and then going to House Bill 389. That passed last year, and that increased the property tax reduction of circuit breaker, the benefit to $150 or $1,500. But the real significant piece, implication of that was to qualify for the homestead exemption, your property could not exceed 125% of the median value. If it was over that, your only alternative for tax relief would have been a property tax deferral, and that is you, in essence, any taxes come out of the value, become a lien against your home, and they accrue until the property is sold. So that was 125% median value. 117 people in Boise City were scheduled to come off. That was going to go into effect this year, but the legislature passed a bill, House Bill 41, this year, effective this year. It changes that to either $300,000 or 150% of the median value. And that, as I mentioned a minute ago, we had 117 people coming off. That new bill is going to cut that down to 43 people will lose the advantage of the property tax circuit breaker or PTR. And then I just want to note, Colin Patterson came to our office several weeks ago to talk about how we can partner, increase participation of the circuit breaker program. We've always just figured it's about 70% of the eligible people are actually taking advantage of that. And we're really looking forward to next year. It's a little bit late for this, but working with Boise City, somehow targeting that extra 30% to try to get those people enrolled in the program. It's a marvelous program. And then I'm just going to wrap up. House Bill 673, I mentioned that. It's a change in land use is no longer recognized in the new construction rule. So we've talked about assessment process, valuations, and legislative issues that might affect you. And I would certainly answer any questions that we've got in the remaining 3 minutes.
Madam Mayor, thank you so much, Bob. It's great to see you in person. So thanks for coming and
Yes, it's
joining
nice
us.
to see you, Holly.
I had a question about assessments and the residential versus commercial, you kind of touched a little bit on what the factors are that go into those assessments, but can you dive a little bit deeper on what factors go into residential that might be different than the assessment factors in commercial? I know that there's some different considerations.
Very briefly, single-family residential, we assess that on what is called the market approach, and that is we're looking at sales and adjusting values to the sales. Commercial property mainly is assessed on the income approach. So we look at the income and we capitalize the income to that particular business. And this is really a source of confusion. And that is, it's not potential gross income of the business. It is the income attributable to the land and the building only. So it doesn't include all of the business value.
Madam Mayor, follow up. Where do you get that data on what the income is? Is that based on tax data, or do people voluntarily just give it to you, or how does that happen?
I've had a legislator disagree with me on this. It's very difficult to come by. And that's why it's difficult to assess commercial property. I had a legislator say, Bob, this information is freely available. Call any property owner, call any appraiser, and they'll give it to you. I went back to my appraisal staff and I said, is this right? It's absolutely not. It's not forthcoming. Even at appeals, sometimes they won't present that.
So let me see if I'm getting this straight. So on residential, you have market data based on actual sales, based on actual values. On commercial, you're kind of dealing with this kind of gray, murky, pseudo data, what is kind of available. And so it's probably not a real market-based approach.
We do have a few sales, maybe 100 commercial sales. So we can work with that a little bit, but primarily we're looking at the income that the land and the building would generate. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I've just got a follow-up question on that. I mean, this came up as an issue last year, a concern of many people, and not just Boise City right now, but other cities in the Valley, with the numbers that you showed us, the increase in home value, excuse me, home assessments versus commercial assessments. What are your solutions? What are you seeking in terms of legislative aid to create a more equitable process to help our residents who are suffering under these huge increases of assessment?
Well, I've been outspoken from the day that they took the indexing off. I'm just literally minutes after the House Revenue Tax Commission took that off. I really just very aggressively trying to get that back on. Last year, they moved up to 125,000, but that really isn't nearly enough. So
I'm sorry, I probably wasn't clear. I didn't mean on the homeowner side. I meant on the commercial side to correct the value of assessments that you're putting on commercial property.
So
to provide yourself with more tools to more accurately reflect the market and value of these commercial sales.
In that context, probably the best thing would be disclosure, where they have to disclose this information to us. And of course, that would apply to, does that help?
Is that something you've asked the legislature to address in their property tax efforts?
Yeah, we've been asking for it for years and years and years. And we saw something like that, but it's just the legislature is not amenable to that at all. So that will be for someone else to try to get that done.
So let me put a little bit finer point on that. So what kind of the outcome of this conversation has been, the legislature requires disclosure for the market on residential, does not require disclosure for the market on commercial. And so we don't really know how equitable it really is. And it's seeming like it's becoming less equitable, yet they're not taking action to correct the inequity. Is that a fair assessment?
If you said that they're required to disclose residential sales, they do not, but we get MLS numbers. So we just have, 12,000 numbers to work off of. So mainly it's MLS is required from their agents, and we exchange data with MLS.
Oh, okay.
But commercial, extremely difficult to get.
Madam Mayor, thank you. I have a quick question about, the fact that our city is going through some changes in terms of the way we do our work. We're now running by districts, and we're all going to be running soon. I'm wondering if that is going to figure into any of this at all, about your work, about assessing property values. Does that figure into any of that? Will that be affecting?
Madam Mayor, Councilman Sanchez, no.
Okay.
We aren't even aware of the bad. We look at maps, but when we're doing this, we don't look at that at all.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us.
It was so good to see everybody again. Really good to
Thanks,
see you.
So we're going to take a 5-minute break before we jump into budget. Well, welcome back, everybody. Whew. Before Eric and Linda launch into what in many ways is kind of a budget primer / budget 101, but with some information, of course, in real time for this budget planning process, I just wanted to say a couple things. I mean, first off, we've heard from, all of us are hearing from residents that they're struggling around affordability. And there are so many services and needs that our existing residents expect us and deserve for us to be able to provide to them. And of course, it gets harder and harder as we grow to balance all of the current needs and ensure that we don't impact the services and affordability that existing residents have experienced over time as we welcome in new residents and new pressures. So what we're aiming to do, our goal with this budget is to make sure that we continue to keep our community safe, that we seek every opportunity we can find to support economic development, economic opportunity, and that we continue to invest in smart tools that will encourage additional investment in housing, and that we're able to take decisive climate action so that we can protect our public's health, the quality of life in our community, and ultimately be prepared for an economy that's next for our kids. And I'm really impressed with staff's commitment to meeting these goals, to serving our existing residents and not sacrificing the experience that we have here for those that are coming because they like what we have. But at the same time, we need to explore some relief. It's frustrating and concerning to see from the assessor that there's, it's an easy for him to increase assessments on residential property and not on commercial property. We've been to countless presentations where we're hearing that there's so much money, everybody's buying, selling, trading commercial property that they can't find enough. There's so much money. Yet that's not reflected in the way he's approaching assessments, and that hurts our residents. And so because of all of this, I have asked staff as they move into the budget to look at the long-term as implications as well as current savings to residents if we take less than 3% this year. And then also with the passage of the circuit breaker program, that's something I had said I wanted for years. I've wanted to see as a tool a city can use. We'll look to use that to provide additional relief to those who are currently qualified for the circuit breaker program, but then also seek to grow the number of folks that are taking advantage of one of the very few opportunities that they have for property tax relief. And so with that, we'll kick it off. Please just kind of engage with questions, things that you want us to be thinking about, things you've heard from your constituents, and we'll take it from there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, members of the council. So as the mayor mentioned, this in some regard will be a kickoff to the budget process. We will do, some overview of where we were or where we are in the current fiscal year as context setting, and then we'll go over some themes. So from a discussion agenda point, we'll speak about what are we hoping to accomplish through the annual budget process, and that really holds true through every year. Do some of that context setting, do an overview of the preliminary forecast and themes that we're seeing, and then we can talk about next steps. So, just for folks that may be watching at home, what do we try to accomplish through the annual budget process? We really seek to ensure that funding for the upcoming fiscal year aligns with the current values and priorities of the organization. The annual budget process does not reset all of the services that are provided and redo the entire budget. The majority of the budget for the city is dedicated towards ongoing expenses, primarily personnel. So what we seek to do is to ensure that we have updated all of our costs for the upcoming fiscal year to be reflective of the anticipated cost. So we ensure that there's sufficient funds available to support planned and ongoing costs. We seek to adjust for the revised costs of ongoing services, update all of our revenue assumptions, and really seek to resolve any differences between planned revenues and anticipated expenses. So to do just a brief overview for context setting, and we'll look at the fiscal year 22 adopted budget, you can see that there's really 4 categorizations of fund types. We have the general fund, capital funds, enterprise funds, and our other funds. So the general fund is the one that we talk a lot about in these types of settings. It's supported via property tax, sales tax, and reflects general governmental services. So you can think police, fire, parks, and library. The fiscal year 22 budget for the general fund was approximately $276 million, and that made up just over 40% of the citywide budget. Capital funds, we have a handful of dedicated capital funds that account for capital projects associated with general government functions. So you can think about, the construction of parks, construction of public safety facilities, but also included in that category would be vehicle replacements or any of our fleet or major repairs that we do at those general government function facilities. That's about 5% of our budget and approximately $33 million. Then we have enterprise funds. So when you think about those, we can think about our airport, geothermal, water renewal, solid waste funds. Those account for both operating and capital needs, approximately 44% of our budget, and just under $300 million. And then we have a handful of other funds that make up just under 10% of our budget. We can think about like our debt service fund, our healthcare trust fund, our various housing funds, and our fleet fund. And those were just under $60 million as part of this year's budget. Now, as we think about our expenditures kind of by category, there's 3 primary categories that we'll break this into: capital and equipment, personnel, and then maintenance and operations. And again, this is all funds, and I'll dive deeper into the general fund in just a moment. So our capital and equipment at approximately a quarter of the citywide budget, that would be for all of our capital projects across the organization. So the parks and the public safety facilities, but then you can also think about things like the airport parking garage or improvements at our water renewal facilities. Approximately a third of the citywide budget is dedicated towards personnel. So that would be salary and benefit costs associated with both our permanent and our temporary city positions. And then maintenance and operations, which is something of a catch-all, but you can think about that as being non-personnel, non-capital related expenses. That's the largest portion of our budget. And you can think about things like supplies, fuel, utilities, insurance, contracts for services, transfers we make between funds, and our various contingencies. I'll spend just a quick minute kind of going over our general fund and going over a few more summary slides before we get into specific fiscal year 23 themes. When we look at the general fund and the revenue that is received in the general fund, approximately 60% of that comes from property tax. And I have a handful of slides to go deeper into the property tax in just a moment. You can see departmental revenue at approximately 11%, and a handful of other categories at lower levels, sales tax at 8%, internal charges, so on and so forth.
Madam Mayor, Eric, remind me, but my memory is that our property tax over the last few years has actually been up in the upper 60%, and this is a fair amount lower. So what's contributing to that? Is that the bonds that we've led, or what is the
I think council member Clegg, I think the primary reason that went down as part of the fiscal year 22 budget was an approach that we took in developing the current year budget to dedicate any unallocated resources from the prior year as part of the budget process. So you can see that carry forward number of 6%. We hadn't necessarily done that in the past, and we were ending up with unallocated resources at the end of the year, and we're trying to proactively include that in the budget. So as a percentage, it reduces the property tax.
So this may actually be more accurate in terms of reflecting the amount of property tax we're collecting in this year for this year's budget.
Within this fiscal year, it does, correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's, I mean, you know, rule of thumb was always if you could keep it below 62 or 63%, you were doing pretty good as a you know, percentage of the whole. And so this actually makes me feel better than I felt for a while, because we were up at 66, 67%, which seemed like too heavily dependent on property tax.
And I might note that, you know, if you look at this pie chart, you would see that 61%. That carry forward is a combination of lots of revenues from the prior year. So it could be some sales tax, it could be some departmental revenue, it could be property tax.
Yeah.
So,
thank you.
just an overview of our departmental revenue, because this is one that folks oftentimes ask about. You can see that over half of our departmental revenue is related to public safety contracts. So we provide both police and fire services on behalf of other agencies. And that's, approximately $15 million. And then you see a lot of recreational programs on the left-hand side within our parks department. So you'll see Idaho Ice World, golf, aquatics, making up a good chunk of those other programs. You'll also see things in there like, licenses and inspections. That's different than our development services. So this would be like things you might see on the first floor. And then we have things like the library and other revenues included there. As we look at our expenses on this chart, you can see that overwhelmingly the majority of our budget in the general fund is dedicated towards personnel, approximately 2/3 of that. In addition to that, you can see M&O, so our non-personnel type expenses at about 16%, transfers to debt service fund or other funds. And then you can see VRT at about 3.1%. I'll note that the debt service transfer for the current year is probably an outsized number compared to what you might see as part of this upcoming year, because we proactively allocated one-time funding as part of the 22 budget to retire some debt.
Madam Mayor, another quick question, Eric, just so I can get my head around this. The previous slide showed expenditure or revenues by category. Do you have a slide upcoming that shows expenditures by category?
So
Other than, by department.
I do.
Excuse me.
I do.
Okay,
right here. Thank you. So if you look at it on a department basis, just over half of the citywide budget is dedicated towards public safety. You can see Parks and Recreation at 14%. And then, in other pie slivers, you can see Planning and Development, Public Works, some of our other forward-facing departments. Contractual services is in there. That is primarily the city's contribution towards public transportation and VRT. On a citywide basis, it makes about 3% of the overall budget. If you assign that budget to property tax, the city has set a goal of 5% of our property tax being dedicated towards VRT, and that's what that comes to. So with that, I'll start to move into, fiscal year 23 discussion. So as we started to pull together the preliminary forecast, and there's still a lot more work to do, we anticipate that the net position of the general fund will be positive going into fiscal year 23. And there are, a handful of inputs that contribute to that. A portion of it attributable to one-time funds resulting from vacancies. So I mentioned that, we as part of this current fiscal year budget, we proactively programmed prior year expenses, and we're going to aim to do the same thing this year, hopefully to minimize the amount of unallocated resources at the end of the year and proactively allocate as part of the budget process. We are seeing quite a high level of vacancies, which is contributing to that. And with that high level of vacancies, there are other resulting savings with less people available to actually do the work. Other project-related expenses aren't happening as well. So there's multiple factors there. We also anticipate, as part of this budget process, one-time funds, being available and being directed towards other one-time type needs, and those one-time funds coming from a variety of sources, including ARPA, which there will be a more detailed discussion on that forthcoming for the council, and other one-time sources such as the Open Space and Clean Water Levy Fund and a handful of others. The revenue methodology is largely consistent with prior years and forecasts. I'll note a couple of differences. Both development fees and sales tax are a bit higher than we had forecasted last year at this time. Development fees, we did increase our revenue assumptions as part of the 22 budget, and we had seen a higher level of activity than even we would have anticipated in the prior fiscal year and into this fiscal year. So we're trying to program that. And as a reminder, those fees are to offset costs associated with reviewing development, so on and so forth, in our planning and development services and public works departments. Sales tax, this is going to be a difficult one, probably for the next little bit here to project. From a forecast standpoint, we've largely assumed 1% growth because of some legislation that was approved in calendar year 2020 at the statewide level. That legislation was intended to equalize sales tax receipts across all agencies or across all cities within the state. And what they were attempting to do was say cities that were below a certain per capita level distribution would see a cap of 1%, while the other cities caught up. The city of Boise is in a position where we're close to that per capita level, and we're probably going to fluctuate between 1% growth and catching the full growth. So we anticipate that, for this next couple of quarters, I know Mike spoke at the quarterly report discussion a couple of months ago that we had received full growth for the first quarter. That effectively resets our baseline. So our sales tax is a little bit higher than we had in prior forecast periods. And then property tax, we have some assumptions here, which I'll go through.
Madam Mayor. So Eric, on the sales tax with 781, how is that going to impact our forecast? So the legislation that allocated the Wayfair funding from the internet sales tax through the distribution formula, but with a reduction to pay for court services.
Thank you for the question, council member. So with that legislation, there will be a little reduction in property tax from a county perspective. The way that was made up was from a reduction in online sales tax that would be dedicated towards both counties and the cities. There's been a lot of dialogue over the last several years in terms of how to allocate that Wayfair funding. And to date, we have not programmed that Wayfair funding. So it would result in less than we otherwise would have received. And we have not yet programmed that amount.
Thank you. Follow up, if I could, even though it'll be less than we otherwise would have received in 2024, had we anticipated going forward the money in the forecast going forward? And if not, should we, at this point, should we maybe at least consider looking at anything above what we had previously projected as money that we could use for tax relief or other things that the mayor spoke about in terms of priorities?
Certainly, we can look at that. You know, I know that at the state legislative level, there's been a lot of discussion over the last 2-3 years in terms of utilizing that money for certain state priorities. With legislation that was approved this year, it may be more likely that funding does come to the city. So we can certainly look at that. As we, develop our forecast, we're not only looking at the upcoming fiscal year, but we take a long-term view, to ensure that, any recommendations that we make, keeps the city on a sustainable financial path. So as we look at, the outer years, we do anticipate, being in a positive position, but I'll get into some risk factors that are out there. And I will also mention that the further out you get into the forecast, the less flexibility there is as our expenditure growth outpaces projected revenue growth. Some of those factors that could influence what our preliminary forecasts look like include the possibility of a recession. So you read the news every day, and increasingly more and more people are speculating that we could be heading towards a recession at some point here, which would have the effect of potentially impacting some of our more economically sensitive revenue sources. And when I say those, I'm primarily thinking about sales tax, development fees, and to some degree our departmental revenues as well. If there were to be further legislative impacts on our revenue streams in the last, handful of years, we've seen property tax reduced, we've seen sales tax impacts, we've seen liquor tax even. So, that could certainly impact things going forward. Decisions around property tax growth. COVID is still, something to be thoughtful about. We've seen it come in waves, and to the degree that it should emerge again, in terms of closures or reduced activity levels, that could impact our revenue collections. Labor costs and staff growth, and the pace at which we grow both of those items, and then inflation, which I'll speak about a little bit more. So,
Eric, are you going to talk about labor costs and staff growth later in the presentation?
A little bit, I am, yes.
I'll hold my questions for then.
Okay. So some themes, as we're working to develop recommendations as part of the 23 budget process. Obviously, property tax. So the mayor mentioned the circuit breaker rebate program, which we'll be looking at. Also be evaluating options around the annual 3% base growth. Numerous community priorities out there, for example, pathways, housing, the mayor mentioned climate. We do think that there will be some opportunities to significantly advance those goals, particularly with some of our one-time funding that's been made available. Looking at working to stabilize the workforce to ensure high-quality service delivery for the community. And then response to growth and inflation. So the next handful of slides are specific to property tax. As we talked about, they're generally around 66% of revenues as part of this year, 61%. It's been a relatively stable revenue source. There's really two ways that year-over-year receipts in property tax can increase. The first is a base increase of up to 3%. And when we think about that base increase, it's generally used to support cost increases associated with our existing services. And then funding that is made available in property tax associated with new construction and annexation, as well as retiring urban renewal districts. And generally that funding is dedicated to support new costs. So you can think about new police, fire, parks maintenance, associated costs. For the purposes of forecasting, I have assumed a 3% annual growth throughout the preliminary forecast. Certainly, to the mayor's point and direction, we'll be looking at options around that. We have assumed the 90% of estimated new construction value. That number has been reduced due to legislation from last calendar year. Decisions around both of those are considered by the City Council as part of the annual budget process. If we go back to fiscal year 21, when the City Council authorized a 0% increase to property tax, we claimed that that amount is foregone. That was $4.8 million that is, available at some future point in time, should the council ever decide to do that. I have not currently assumed any of that in fiscal year 23 projections, nor in any outer years of the forecast. Some themes that came out of the most recent legislative session. There was a lot of discussion about a potential bill that would eliminate property taxes altogether on owner-occupied residential properties and replace that revenue with an increase in sales tax. That potential legislation didn't advance, but there's a lot of dialogue already that it will likely come back as part of next year's legislative session. There was legislation that would reduce county property taxes, as I mentioned a little bit ago, and that would be offset by allocating online sales tax that was slated to go to counties and cities. So that piece was approved. There was legislation that expanded the eligibility of the circuit breaker program. So the assessor was talking a little bit about last year's legislation that capped eligibility at, I want to say it was 125% of median value. Legislation that was approved this go round brought it up to 150% of the median value, or 300,000, whichever is greater. So that will restore eligibility to some of those that lost.
Madam Mayor, I was trying to remember this and I couldn't. Is that circuit breaker legislation at a county level rather than statewide, or is it statewide as well? I know the homeowner exemption percentage is statewide.
Council member, that is a statewide program.
So an area like Boise really suffers a lot more.
I'm sorry, it's administered at a statewide level, but the median value
in
is
this
at
case, okay,
is
that's
at a
what I was.
county level.
Yeah, so
Yes.
thankfully that'll help a fair amount.
Yes. And then there is the opportunity to provide rebates to taxpayers, and that could allow the city to enhance the benefits to those participating in the circuit breaker program going forward. The county assessor spoke a little bit about this, and I'm sorry that it's so small in the slide, but it's intended to show the burden of property tax by the two sectors, residential and commercial. And you can see that at the very beginning of the slide, which was, I can't see it from here, I think it was 2001, they were roughly equal. Both segments were, approximately contributing half of the property taxes that were received by the city of Boise. Over time, they separated. They got a little bit closer during the Great Recession. And then ever since the recovery from the Great Recession, they have gotten further and further apart. And the rate at which they are separating has increased based on the numbers that the county assessor mentioned in terms of the 30 to 35% growth for residential and 15% growth for commercial. I would fully expect to see those numbers further move apart once we get data for the current fiscal year. These are just some statistics. We like to do analysis looking at the average home, and you can see in fiscal year 2016, the average home, the assessed value in the city of Boise was $214,000. In fiscal year 22, it was $440,000. You can see on the next column, the assessed growth on that average home has been increasing, pretty rapidly, up to 25% last year, and we would expect to see that number again increase, maybe at a similar level. The homeowners exemption was fixed at $100,000, was capped at $100,000 up until 2021, where it was reset, but at a capped level of $125,000. You can see the tax growth on that average home. On the second column from the left, year over year has gone up, with the exception of fiscal year 2021, when the city participated in the governor's property tax relief program and took a 0% increase. And on the far right, you can see—
And Eric, just for the public, as we talk about this, I think it's important to clarify that the 0% that we took, so zero growth, didn't equal down 14.6%. But because we took zero growth, the state gave us lots of money that could be rebated back to the people, really.
Absolutely. Thank you for that clarification. And I can adjust that for future presentations. We would not have seen a 14.6% decrease if it was just the 0%. In fact, you would have seen an increase despite the 0%.
Yeah. Thanks.
This chart basically shows that same averaged priced home, and you can see that in 2016, approximately 58% of that home was subject to property tax. Because of the homeowners exemption no longer being indexed, and the extreme rate of growth on residential properties, you can see that, as part of this past budget cycle, we pegged 72% of that average home as being subject to property tax. So increasingly, more and more of the average home is subject to property tax.
Eric, Madam Mayor, question on that. If there was a movement to bring forward some legislation that actually did work on the homeowners exemption, my memory of the legislation that got the farthest 2 years ago is that it had a 5-year implementation scale, so that it doesn't just flip one. Right now commercial property is paying X. You do the homeowners exemption, you bring the residential property down to Y, and all of a sudden the commercial property in 1 year is paying a lot more. What would be a good strategy if we were to get behind some effort to fix this? Or have you run the numbers on that?
We have not run numbers specifically on, a ramp up period to get there. If it was to be indexed at the current level, so taking the $125,000 and then catch up year over year growth, it probably would be less of an impact, but it would also not correct for the years that there wasn't an increase. So if there was ever an attempt to catch up for the years of the homeowners exemption being capped, you might have to look at a multi-year strategy, and that's something we can look at.
Thank you.
And this slide, which I know everybody at this table has seen before, but it's one that we like to show, basically shows the impact of the city taking the 3% or not taking the 3%. And there's a lot on the slide, but you can see fiscal year 21, the average priced home was assessed at $351,000 in the city of Boise. In fiscal year 22, it was $440,000. After you subtract the homeowner's exemption on line 3, you can see the taxable value, and you can see that the taxable value on that average priced home went up by 25.6%. After looking at the levy rate adjustment, you can see that the city taxes on that home would have gone up by 29.9%, which was a $335 increase. Down below, we run the numbers, but in a theoretical situation going into fiscal year 22, we looked at if the city did not take the 3% increase. And the increase on that home would have still been $292, which makes the point that, Mayor, you were just making on a couple of slides ago, that even with a 0% increase, you would still see an increase on the average home. In this instance, for fiscal year 22, it was about a $42 impact from taking the 3%. The difference between those two numbers is really a handful of things. Going into the current year, that one-time relief that was made available expired. We continue to see diminishing value of the homeowner's exemption. And then as discussed by the county assessor, the rate of growth for residential property is just much higher due to commercial property from an assessment standpoint.
So I'm going to ask you a question that if you're not prepared to answer, that's okay. You know, we look at this, we want to provide help and relief to our residents. And I think anything that we can do, we ought to be looking at. But if residents are to get meaningful relief, is it that we ought to be asking the assessor to freeze residential values, to come up with a solution on commercial values? What is it?
There are probably multiple solutions, but I think certainly looking at the assessment process and ensuring that the assessments for commercial properties are reflective of what might actually be happening is probably a major part of that solution. Yeah.
Madam Mayor, just to follow up on Madam Mayor's question, is there anything compelling the assessor to take the increasing market rate value and making the decision about our property tax rates? Or is it just a choice, just the way the commercial folks are choosing not to be forthcoming with information that could be taken into consideration in setting that property value amount?
Thank you very much, Councilmember Sanchez. There are certainly requirements that are placed upon the assessors within the state for degrees of accuracy. So they are bound to be within, I want to say, a 10% degree of accuracy on residential properties, and there are similar requirements on commercial. So they work with the tools that they have, but they are bound by state legislation as well to maintain accuracy. So absent some other legislation, I don't know that they have much of a choice to freeze or to hold the line on residential properties. But that would be something that maybe we could talk further with the assessor about.
Madam Mayor,
Mhm.
maybe I should have made this comment a little bit ago, but the assessor's job is to, as closely and accurately as possible, assess, value, and tax residential properties consistent with their actual value in the market. And his job is to, as closely as possible, assess, value, and tax commercial properties as close as possible to their market value. And the commercial world is not being forthcoming with the documents that show the actual value. That's proof that he's getting it wrong. It's proof that he's not on the line. because they'd be very forthcoming if they were being overtaxed. And so something has to be done. And I don't know if it's legislative, I don't know how we can help, but the fact that people aren't saying, hey, you're taxing me too much, shows that they're not being taxed enough.
So I do wonder about that, because if the assessor is bound to be within 10% accuracy, but the information doesn't exist, where's the accountability? And can residents make a complaint that the assessment on a commercial property isn't accurate, in the same way that residents can show up to contest an assessment on their own property? I don't understand this piece. Or if the assessor were willing to respond to what we're seeing in this market and guess that if residential is going up 30%, then surely commercial is too. Somebody on the commercial side would say you're not right on that, if that was indeed the case. And unless somebody contested it, it would stand. So we've got to figure out how, if the legislature is serious about property tax relief, and folks at the county in particular that have the power to impact assessments, which is impacting affordability for our residents, are serious about property tax relief, they'd be looking at how they could proactively right the ship, where we as residents are carrying the burden up to 50% more in the last 6 years.
Madam Mayor, just want to ask you a question. Just comment on something that the assessor said, where he said that they didn't get as many appeals as they normally would. And I wonder if that's people have just lost faith in the process. I don't see it as that anybody's satisfied with their assessment. I see it as people have just lost faith and given up. That's just a comment I wanted to make.
Madam Mayor, one more quick comment to add a little bit to what the mayor said, because I really agree. This isn't about sticking it to businesses, and it's not about sticking it to commercial property. The reason that we're talking about this is because every dollar that a commercial property owner avoids in tax that they should pay based on the actual value of their property is a dollar that homeowners have to pay instead. And so in an actual real nuts and bolts way, if this dynamic is happening, homeowners are paying taxes for businesses. That's the problem. And it's just about fairness. It's about who should be paying the taxes on the commercial property, because every time the commercial property is avoided, it gets picked up by the homeowners instead. And so that's the dynamic. It's not about harming businesses or taxing businesses or being inhospitable in that way. It's about fairness for everybody.
Madam Mayor, I'd just like to kind of piggyback on everything that's been said and add, when you look at the legislature and the policies that come out of the legislature, so often they're influenced by people with lobbyists. And frankly, those are commercial business owners and businesses. At the same time, residents don't really have lobbyists except cities, counties, the folks who are collecting property taxes and who are really hearing a lot from our residents about how it's hurting them. And we're there advocating almost, every single day, a lot of us, even more so than others, but we're down there advocating for our residents, and we're not taken seriously. We're not respected. We're not invited into conversations about actual property tax relief and about how we can actually better serve our citizens. Instead, any of the real solutions are jettisoned by lobbyists who are representing business. And back to Councilmember Bajan's point, it's not about sticking it to business. Businesses they're the backbone of our economy. They're the way that we raise and support our families. They're the way that we contribute to society. But also, they should be paying their fair share for city service, for police and fire that also serve commercial properties. And that's just not being done right now. So I think that there are a lot of solutions that have been presented to the legislature and they just fail year over year to take up the actual solutions and instead just keep piling this on the back of residents. And it's completely unfair. And so for those of us who are there lobbying on behalf of residents all the time, I think that if residents can really reach out to their legislators around the state and say, hey, this is my understanding of what's going on, it could help. We'll certainly keep fighting year over year. It's for actual property tax relief for residents. And I have a question in addition to my soapbox comments. Have you, Eric, run, so you have the outlay for homeowners. Yeah. Have you run that for commercial properties as well? Do you have a similar slide that would show the impact of the 15% increase in commercial properties?
Councilmember, that is a difficult one. We've thought about how to do that. There isn't necessarily an average priced commercial property for us to do that with. Well, what I can say is that we have looked at different commercial properties and tried to, track what is happening with them. And oftentimes we see actual year over year reductions, which is kind of the way that the levy system works. If you see an extreme increase on one, so I was going to go to this slide. So, if you see on that second from the right column, the tax growth on an average home being almost 30% as part of this year, certainly if you look at the next column, the budgeted base growth being 3%, the difference between that 3% and the 30% is being borne by somebody. Anecdotally, as we look at different commercial properties, we're seeing actual reductions, even if their value is increasing, 5, 10, 15% per year in relation to the residential properties. It actually comes out to a reduction.
Mayor, just thank you for that, Eric. And just one more comment. I don't think that the lack of people showing up to the assessor's office to protest their assessment is necessarily based on people being happy with their assessment. I think it's just really based on, we all know that residential property values are going up. Like, I look at houses around me that are selling and I'm astounded at how much they're selling for. And so I look at those properties and I look at my house and I'm like, holy smokes, my house is probably worth a lot of money compared to when I bought it. And so I don't really think it's, well, we're really happy with this assessment. This seems like all hunky-dory. It's just more like being resigned to the fact that, oh, this is my assessment. It is what it is. I'm not going to go throw a fit because, we can all see what's happening around us. We can see what houses are selling for. We only have so much energy to protest real things without protesting things that we will never win. So thank you.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. So a couple of thoughts and maybe a proposal. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but first of all, the thoughts. Many of us know what's happening today with commercial property versus residential property. We know that the homeowner's exemption fix would be a part of a solution. I think not a lot of people, especially maybe those who are listening today online, know that commercial property, in addition to the value of the building that they occupy, used to pay taxes on either the inventory or the personal property as part of that building. And the reason for that, and frankly, I think the fairness in that was that it represented the value of the business being done out of that building, not just the value of the building. Take a warehouse as an example. The building itself is frankly not very valuable, but the amount of business being done out of that warehouse may be an awful lot, much more than the value of the building. So that got exempted. And then personal property, in the case of an office building, the computers, the printers, all of that, again, begins to represent the value of the business being done out of that. And so as we talk about the homeowners exemption, I think it's fair to talk about, again, a fairness issue, equalizing homeowners and residential property with the exemptions that already exist for commercial property. So we have the valuation problem on commercial property, but we also have the fact that over time, they've been exempted from much of what they used to pay in property tax. And so it's only fair at this point to increase the exemption for residential property. So I just say that because I think part of what I'd like to see, I think we're at a point, this is an election year, it's going to be hopefully a point of conversation among many, that we could band together with other cities. I know that the Association of Idaho Cities potentially could be the avenue for this, but I'm not sure that they're the effective avenue because they don't really represent the residents in our cities. And I think we have a much closer tie to that. They represent sort of the business part of how cities operate. Is there an opportunity to work with other cities individually and then collectively, both to disseminate information and make sure that residents around the state, as they make their choices this November, understand the implications of what they're hearing from the various candidates. I know that we as a city can't step into elective politics, but we can step into information. So just a thought. I've been watching this now for, almost 30 years. Prior to my time on city council, I was watching it for other reasons, and it just seems to get worse and worse. And I don't know what does turn it around, but information might be a start.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Like I brought up when the assessor was here, I'm wondering, as the way we represent our city as council members is changing now that we're going to be embracing or we're having districts. I'm wondering how that will figure into the way we look at our budget and the way our citizens look at our budget. I mean, having been here 4 years, sometimes our residents engage and will come when we do our budget presentations, but I wonder if that will change once we are fully running by districts. And I'm just wondering if we're going to be able to look at how funds are distributed by district, because I feel it's been early in this new process, but I already feel a tone change with constituents in District 3. There is a bit more scrutiny than I experienced prior to the district change. And I'm wondering if that's going to change and they may be asking for information based on district.
I can speak, thank you for the question, Councilmember Sanchez. I can speak, from a budget development standpoint, we work to develop a budget for the entire city and, ensure equity in certain areas. You can think about the discussion we had recently around parks, where we have park planning areas and we, seek to ensure that, the parks are built, across the city. It may be something for future councils to think about. If there was to be any portions of allocations that would be looked at, but I can say from a budget development standpoint, so many of the costs are central across the organization. You can think about public safety services or internal support services that really service the entire community. Budgeting them differently by council area or something like that could present some logistical challenges.
I think I'll jump in here since I represent the entire city. I think I doubt that constituents are asking, how much of our budget is going into legal services that address our district, or, how much of the clerk's office is our district funding. I think what they're probably most interested in is our budgets and parks and access to the zoo and different facilities, as well as public safety. And as a city, we have a long history and tradition of looking at that very analytically and making sure that we're investing and across the city. And with new tools like our Pathways plan, we'll get a disproportionate amount of investment in, the neighborhoods that are beyond the center city neighborhoods and into those districts. Our parks analysis that has investments in the next several years laid out are throughout the city. And so I think it's important as we seek to ensure that our residents around the city continue to have the support, the access to opportunity, the programming that we value here, that we're not reducing. We do everything we can to prevent the corrosion of those services in light of the impacts of property tax legislation. And at the same time, be clear with the public that there's so much more than just the green up of a park, because to do that, you've got to deal with the legal costs of making sure that it's all done correctly, that the clerk's got a role there. When they go out to make sure dogs are on leash, that's a clerk budget. So everything really does work together to be able to ensure that the city can provide services to her residents that they all want to see. And that I would encourage us all that while we're looking out for our districts and making sure that we're looking to those parks and pathway investments and other things, that we're clear with our residents, like the back office costs, if you will, those hidden costs that people don't think about that make those services possible. But that also we don't want to end up in some entrenched, segregated, separate environment where neighborhoods are fighting against neighborhoods for investments. Because police don't think, oh, I'm not going to cross this district line. Firefighters don't think I'm not going to cross this district line. Neither do many of our residents when they go enjoy a regional park versus a neighborhood park. So that we really remain one city despite districts.
And a move to now just some other themes, harking back to one of the earlier slides. So, around community priorities and aiming to ensure that this budget is reflective of those community priorities. Certain areas, if you think about the transportation, housing, environment, economic development, we think that there will be meaningful opportunity to make some rapid progress in those areas, utilizing some of those one-time resources. In the realm of public safety, looking to continue to expand utilization or allocation of resources with a mix of one-time and ongoing funds. So you can think about the Northwest Station, both from a construction standpoint as well as from a staffing standpoint. You can think about Fire Station 5. You can think about the need for additional academies as we see a higher level of vacancies. And you can think about our overall police staffing levels.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
On the top community priorities, I will continue to pound this drum because I think it is important. I've been reading even more evidence that of how important this is that if we marry housing and transportation, recognizing that housing in the right place can reduce transportation costs, it's another way to provide relief for our residents. I recently read a report that indicated that housing that was transit accessible and walk and bike accessible had as much as 10% of their total income less spent on transportation than households that are in drive-only locations. That's a tremendous amount of disposable income. So to the extent that we can think about those two things together and marry our investment in pathways and transit with our investment in housing, I think we can show real benefit to residents.
Thank you. Stabilizing the workforce is a theme that has been talked a lot about. Both recruitment and retention have been a challenge given the current landscape, in terms of providing services to the community. we're currently sitting at a vacancy rate of approximately 10%. And, with that high level of vacancies, there are fewer people to actually do the work for the community, in a period of high growth and high community need. The city, does strive to compensate employees fairly to promote retention and the continuity of services. And the city has, aimed to pay permanent employees a living wage. As we look to fiscal year 23, in terms of stabilizing the workforce, seeking opportunities to, to address workload issues that we're seeing where the current approved staffing levels might not be sufficient. Looking at opportunities, for permanent staff or even contract resources to help. Looking at opportunities to reposition some of our vacancies where feasible, and dedicate, funding that's been allocated for a particular position for some other service or, deviation of the service. And then, where feasible, seeking to address compensation levels also from a recruitment and retention standpoint for the provision of community services.
Mayor, what, oh, sorry.
Nope, you first.
Okay. One of the things I've been thinking about, I guess, as I approach closer to actually retiring myself, is the important tool that the city has that we very rarely tout of being a member of PERSI. I think most of this generation has resigned themselves to self-funding their retirement. And we have a tool that allows them to actually have a defined benefit at retirement. I'm not sure that we use that enough as a recruitment tool. And I just wonder if we might begin messaging more around that.
We've asked HR to work with some compensation experts to get at what's important to current and potential workforce. We're finding it's changing. But have put that in the department's hands to come up with the best compensation package to meet the needs, interests, and wants, quite frankly, of a new generation of workers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So you said 10% vacancy is high. What is a more normal or healthy vacancy rate?
Councilmember Sanchez, if we look, at historical levels, we've been in the, 3, 4, 5% range. So we're almost double or more of where we have been, pre this period.
Okay, thank you.
Just to follow up on that too, this is a fascinating time, talking with other agencies, other cities and mayors just yesterday in the region. We're all facing these same challenges. And if we could take it in that microcosm of we're about double the vacancies we've had, but the level of resignations around the country are more than double what they've been since the last 20 high, which was over 20 years ago. And so there's this shift of both retirements in the workforce and a new generation of workers that are looking for different things, combined with pandemic, combined with a really hot job market that makes it hard for us to compete the way we'd like to, quite frankly. So all of that is really going into this mix as we're looking at how to attract folks. But importantly, and I think we'll get to it, how we keep the folks we have and make sure that the buying power of their salaries isn't waning with every year, but staying where it ought to be so that we're competitive with other agencies, cities, and private industry where we can, so we can keep our current very valuable workforce happy and here within City Hall.
Madam Mayor, this is kind of the slide that I've been waiting for. I think it's probably my area of largest concern, and not concern that the city isn't taking the steps that it needs to address a lot of these issues. It's a really, challenging time. But when we talk about what our community priorities are, and we're talking about the level of service that we have for police and fire, which, is very important. That we also look at the level of service expectations that we have for our community centers, our libraries, these other areas, which I think are some of the ones that are most at risk. When we're looking at employees that are hovering between a $30,000 and a $50,000 or $60,000 range in any job in Boise, like those are the ones where that recruitment and the livability in the future, I think, is the larger concern. And I think that will have some long-term budget impacts when we think about department revenue, the level of service that we're providing in those areas, but then also how that ends up trickling into other areas. And one of the questions I asked our sheriff earlier was how many of the folks who are living in Boise or living in this area are represented at the jail? And it sounds like there's a lot of them. If we're not continuing to invest and prioritize some of those positions at the very, very base level of education and access to opportunity, I really, really worry that we're going to continue to have to invest more on the other side of the spectrum. And so I just want that to be something that's on our radar when we're really looking at some of those base level positions, the impact that they have on the community, both from an economic standpoint and level of service, but also just from a prevention standpoint and an investment standpoint in our future leaders in the community. I think this is the area that scares me the most across the board in nonprofits and cities and everywhere. And it's our community centers, our libraries, are some of our parks and rec staff that are really offering these space level positions. I know that I don't need to lecture on that, but it is something that when we look at our community priorities, I think that level of service there is really important as well.
Thank you for.
I agree with you. And if you'll remember last year in our budget, we had a similar conversation. We need to keep having it, and staff is really looking at that. And our decision last year was to use base salaries to increase the salaries, the largest percentage of those who had the lowest wages in our city to acknowledge that we know that there needed to be more, but also those services are super important. And we use one-time funds for other employees. And so this feedback from our employees as well as the rest of the council is important as we figure out how we best address compensation in this coming budget.
Madam Mayor, I'm reminded that when we first put in our wage and budget process, although parts of it didn't work real well, a part that I think at least philosophically worked well was that the percentage increases were never designed to be across the board. In other words, if I make a lot and I get a 3% and I make a little and I get a 3%, it's not very much down here, it's a lot up here. But if the percentage up here is 2% and this percentage down here is 4%, instead of increasing the gap, it keeps it about the same going forward. So we might think about looking back at that and seeing if across the board, we don't just do percentage increases based on percentage, but also have a formula that calculates the level at which that person is so that we don't keep increasing that gap.
Yeah, I think staff will be looking at both how we make cost of living adjustments as well as an effective merit program work. For so long, the city just had a merit program and no other adjustments. And so then it was unevenly applied as well because it was a 3% bucket that then managers distributed as they saw fit based on merit. But again, as our cost of living is rising, the buying power of everyone's salaries is diminishing. And so if we're going to have a merit program, it really ought to be merit, but then recognize we need to take care of existing employees as costs in this valley grow.
Yeah. Madam Mayor, just to follow up on something that the council president said about, promoting what it is we have to offer, such as Percy, the work that we're doing in DEI and having that be internal work to improve the culture here. I mean, it's something we've promoted. We've talked about it here at council. I think that's something that could be used to highlight something that we have to offer. I quite frankly don't know of another municipality in our state that has been open about doing that work. And I know for myself as a person of color, that's what I'm looking for in terms of an employer. Culture figures into it greatly. Obviously, we want salaries, but you also want to be in a healthy environment. And I think that's something that we should toot our horn about. And who knows, we could be quite the leader of municipalities in our state, especially considering the state where we all live in.
Go ahead.
Just a couple more. as a theme, looking at responding to growth. So, as the community expands, so does the service demand. So you can think about areas like police and fire, parks and recreation, planning and development, transportation and housing, and even the internal support department staffing. And you can see, I apologize again, this one is also quite small, but you can see just the trend line for population growth, both within the city of Boise as well as within Ada County. It's steadily going up. And with that does come service demands on the city that we need to keep up with. And then inflation has certainly been, at the top of the news quite a bit recently. We see it within our city. The cost of basically all the goods and services are increasing at rates that we haven't seen in decades. So, certain things that we're looking at are, a property tax rebate program for the circuit breaker, as mentioned earlier. Evaluating compensation options as per the last discussion, to ensure, recruitment and retention efforts, and the provision of high quality services. Looking at our capital projects, which, continue to escalate, and looking at one-time funding to address rising costs on those. As part of the 23 budget, we have not built in any M&O or non-personnel increases into fiscal year 23, but we have assumed it in the outer years. And the reason we didn't build it into the current fiscal year is because we anticipate that it's going to take a little bit to get out of this vacancy position that we're in. And the vacancies are contributing to savings in other areas as well. And then, other areas that might not be, we haven't talked about in the past, but maybe looking at a fuel contingency in fiscal year 23 to address volatility. I mean, the fuel prices are going up, at a rate that isn't budgeted for within the departments.
Madam Mayor, I think that last point is really great, Eric. And I think this is a nice illustration of the intersection between our climate plans and how it helps us kind of shore up our expenses into the future. Because I look at the fuel contingency, fuel prices, and there are no vehicles that are better suited to electrification than fleet vehicles. Most of them have kind of limited areas of service. They can be easily recharged, and that the pricing certainty that it gives us into future years, I think, is really beneficial to our budget, to our residents, and we can really take that whole volatility piece out as we're replacing those vehicles. So just wanted to point that out.
Madam Mayor, I'd
Agreed.
just like to reiterate that or just back that up. I think I would much rather increase our investment in electrifying sooner than building a fuel contingency.
I imagine that there would have to be a balance of both, given the realities of the fleet,
Probably.
but do agree with both of you. I mean, that's why we're looking at the electrification of our buildings, et cetera. It saves money in the long run. And so we can figure out if there's a way to do a dual phased approach.
Madam Mayor, the fuel contingency, as I understand it, is essentially just a fund that we can draw from to, like, mechanically, how does it work? That's my first question. And the second is, maybe this isn't allowed, but do cities ever just buy contracts for fuel to, buy a futures contract or hedge in the way that any business would, so that we obtain certainty? We know at 12 months, this is what our fuel price will be.
You probably wouldn't want to buy right now.
Well, yeah, it would have been better to do it 6 months ago, but right. But
Alan Shirley actually tried that a few years ago. I don't know.
Council member, that's something I'd have to look into a little bit more in terms of, being able to, stabilize prices and what options might be available from from an operation standpoint. How that might work, a fuel contingency for the next fiscal year is maybe budgeting something centrally that could be allocated if the need is available. One of the things that we've seen, when it comes to electrification, is just the availability. So we've increased our capital funding for electric vehicles. We pursue electric vehicles as the first option in many instances, they're just not available when we need them. So we're going to have to get there over time. So. I'll conclude with next steps, and we can have any kind of conversation that the council might want. Just in terms of a process standpoint, there's going to be quite a bit of council discussion. We have the budget interactive later on this evening. We have budget workshops in May and June. In between there, we'll release the budget workshop, or the budget document, I should say. We have our public hearing in July, and then the budget adoption. From a public engagement standpoint, again, we have that interactive tonight. Later on this week, the budget website will be available for community members to submit comments on their priorities. After the release of the budget document, we'll have another push to solicit public feedback, and then also at the public hearing when community members can come and testify.
Madam Mayor, this isn't for this year, but this is where Councilmember Sanchez's comment earlier about the districts, I think, is important to be looking at, and that I don't think that any of us want the budget discussion to be revolved around certain neighborhoods, but I do think that access to things like the budget interactive and some of the different workshops is a real thing. That if you're a community that is in downtown, or that is in downtown, you've got a lot of opportunity, whereas someone who's maybe isn't is further away. And so that as we start looking in the future, as council is broken up into districts, we do begin the evaluation process of making sure that these budget conversations are available in a variety of different neighborhoods, just from an accessibility standpoint.
Madam Mayor. That's always been important, and we've always tried to do it. And I agree with Madam Mayor that we should be really careful not to focus budget discussions around districts. My experience over the years is that the budget needs don't follow district lines, they follow city priorities. So yes, we should make it available all over the city, but at least from my perspective, we should be careful not to describe that as by district.
Yeah, and Madam Mayor, to be clear, Council President, absolutely not. Like, we don't want to be focusing on the districts being part of the conversation, but we do want to make sure that we're engaging the best that we can. The city's done a great job with this, but it does get more complicated as things are more split up, and making sure that geographically the conversations are available. And they don't have anything to do with the districts themselves. They just have to do with the proximity of different areas of town.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I just want to add, when we were looking at this budget process and developing the way that we wanted to approach it, that was a huge part of the conversation. Like, what are the facilities that we have available throughout the city that could actually accommodate this conversation? And so we talked about fire stations and libraries and various different places. And I think that landing on Hillcrest Library, because it has the space, it has the technological resources that we need to stream, was really a reflection of having that conversation internally about, like, how do we get outside of City Hall and into a place that's more accessible to our residents? And that's how we landed on Hillcrest. Yep.
Madam Mayor, just adding my final 2 cents to this. I'm on record as not wanting districts because I feared of exactly that, of this segregation and this, boundary placing that just really doesn't make sense for the way we've all approached our work. But we have to ask these questions. We have to let our constituents know that we are asking these questions on their behalf. And so I don't think that it reflects our individual desires. I am simply trying to reflect and honor what I was told is the point of having districts, to have better representation. And like I said, I don't doubt at all my colleagues' approach to this work. It's always been about what is best for our beautiful city and all the people who reside here. But again, just trying to honor the folks who pushed districts and letting them know that we are asking these questions.
Madam Mayor, council members, I just wanted to follow up with some of the work I've directed staff to do in this space. So we've had staff with Councilmember Whitting's leadership developing the redistricting process. Step 2 will bring before you considerations for policies you may want to change in light of this. I think nothing's not going to change, but what I think is a better day is coming up with a comprehensive approach and not every budget hearing or every, what are we going to do about districts? So I would like to bring back to you a suite of options you may consider to change the actual procedure and policy of the city in light of districting if you want to, or if you don't want to, so that staff has a better expectation moving forward. And I can perceive some shifts in support. I would see even in the budget process, a consideration of CE support for individual budget hearings. So we don't have to bring everybody out to have these conversations, for example, but just to put in the back of your minds, once we establish the council districting process, we will then come back to you with policy considerations in light of the districts.
With that, is there anything to wrap up with before we take a quick break before noon? All right, thank you all.
Good intro.